Welcome and thank you for standing by. All participants are currently in a listen-only mode for the duration of today's session. Today's call is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the call over to your main speaker, Sam Patton from the U.S. Census Bureau. Sam, you may begin.
Thank you so much, Anthony, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on our webinar on accessing Puerto Rico data on the Census Data API. My name is Sam Patton, and I am joined by my colleague, Noemi Mendez. We're both a part of the Dissemination Outreach branch from the U.S. Census Bureau, which is the branch that helps to manage outreach, feedback, and trainings on data.census.gov, the microdata access tool, and of course, the Census Data API. So we're so very happy to have you all join us here today, and I'm going to go ahead and get started. And to give a brief overview of our agenda today, we're going to spend a bit of time looking at some background and basics, some important things to know about what the Census Data API is and how it works, before we then jump into 3 different API examples to pull some data from Puerto Rico. And then following the completion of our examples, I'll close this out with some resources and we will take questions at the end. I wanted to start by talking about how applications that are built on census data typically take advantage of 3 underlying services. So we have the Census Data API, the Geocoder REST services, and TigerWeb REST services. Today, though, we are only going to focus on the first one on the list here, and that is the Census Data API. And the basic definition of the Census API is that it is a data service that allows software developers and other data users to publicly access our data in a standardized way using a series of commands. It's going to be an extremely efficient way to request data directly from census servers, and with the Census Data API, this standardization across multiple data sets is going to allow you to access data in the same way regardless of the survey or the data. And one of the ways that you can think of the Census API is as a giant warehouse of all sorts of data that the census produces. You'll find data from all sorts of census programs and surveys in there, and we'll cover what's actually available in the API in just a bit. But while there are a lot of different uses for the API, I'd argue that the biggest reason for using the Census API is to simply retrieve data for yourself. Maybe you need a few estimates, or maybe you need an entire table, or maybe you need data from a large group of tables, or perhaps you would like to do something like create an app or a dashboard. Regardless of what you're looking for, though, the API is going to be a great way to get as much or as little data as you need, and really only what you need. So this brings us to the question of who uses the API. And it's not just software developers creating apps and dashboards that use the API. Every day we have researchers, students, teachers, state, local, federal government employees, and a host of other people and organizations that are using the API to get their data. And keep in mind that you don't need any special software or anything like that to use the API. You can retrieve data from the API using nothing more than the web browser on your computer, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing today. We're not going to be using the API through any third-party software or utilizing a programming language like R or Python. We're only going to be accessing the API using our internet browser. So why would you want to go and actually pull data from the API? And I won't go through all of these, but I wanted to focus on the first 2 on the list here. And some of these may be by choice for using the APIs, while others may actually necessitate the use of the API. And the first bullet point here is a good example of something that may actually necessitate use of the API. And that's if you wanted to access some older data that perhaps is not available on data.census.gov. And the example I gave here was pre-2010 ACS or American Community Survey data. So we'll take a look at how to do this in just a bit in one of our examples. The second bullet point here is another example we're going to focus on, and that's if you would like to pull data from multiple tables at once rather than viewing individual tables on data.census.gov. So this is another example we'll take a look at when we get over to our exercises in just a bit, and this will help you save some time if you're pulling lots of data at once. And to find what you need to use the API, you can find everything that you need over on our developers page. And while there are a few different ways that you can get to the data sets in the API, The one place to find all of the data that's housed there is going to be through our discovery tool. And this is going to give you a list of available data sets, descriptions, variables, and geographies available, which is everything you need to help start building out your API queries. While we're on the topic of the developers page, I want to mention that you can also look here to find information about joining our mailing list and our online developers forum. These are ways we can stay connected to inform our users about upcoming changes and improvements, and also for users to share experiences and get help. Coming back to this discovery tool though, this is where you can browse all the data sets that are available. I want to caution you though that the discovery tool is going to initially show you all over 1,300 individual data sets that are currently available all on the same page. So it can be a little bit overwhelming and hard to quickly find exactly what you need if you're a new user to the API, but we do have an alternative that you can use that's a bit easier, a bit more user-friendly that we'll talk about next. For now though, once you are in the discovery tool and you're able to pick out a data set here, you're able to use this tool to help you provide different variables, examples, and things like links to technical documentation. And a moment ago, I mentioned that we do have an alternative to the discovery tool, and that's going to be our available APIs page. On this page, we've basically taken almost all of the API data sets and organized them into a much easier to read format. So here you're able to click on the survey or program that you want to use and then drill down to the specific data set within that survey or program. And to make things easier for the webinar today, when we get over to our examples, we're going to focus primarily on finding data sets through this available APIs page rather than using that discovery tool. And I also wanted to talk about the relationship between data.census.gov and the Census Data API. And hopefully this analogy makes things a bit easier and clearer about the relationship between the two. So let's imagine we have a pond filled with fish that represents our API. All the fish that are found in this pond can be considered individual pieces of data, and then we have a fishing boat out in the pond with two occupants doing some fishing. One of the figures in the boat is going to represent data.census.gov, while the other represents a third party. Let's first talk about the figure that represents data.census.gov. So what this means is that data.census.gov is getting its data from the API. It's basically making queries directly to the API so you don't have to, and usually making a lot of these queries at once and then displaying that data in a more presentation ready format, whether that's through a table, a map, or a featured result, which I have a couple examples of the bottom left of the slide here. This type of packaging is one of the major benefits to using data.census.gov to get your data. The other figure in the boat who's also fishing in this API pond is named third party. Now, rather than using data.census.gov to do the fishing, this third party is making queries themselves directly to the API. So when you make these queries directly to the API, you can request a single estimate, a group of estimates, or even an entire table. But keep in mind though, that whenever you do directly query the API, the data will not be formatted and it will not be in the same kind of table map or presentation ready format. If you do need your data in such a format and you don't want to manually put it in some kind of presentation ready format, you could use data.census.gov instead. What I really want you to take away from this though is that regardless of whether you're making individual queries to the API on your own or whether you're getting data through data.census.gov, you are still getting the same data. And as I mentioned earlier, currently the Census Data API has over 1,300 datasets available for public use. While that may sound like a very large number, keep in mind that among these datasets, we're able to access a wide variety of data, including the American Community Survey, Decennial Census, the Economic Census, and migration flows, just to name a few. And also keep in mind that each and every year that's available for each one of these surveys and programs also counts as its own separate dataset. I also wanted to briefly talk about API keys. So in all cases of using the Census API, making queries is going to be completely free. However, if you plan to make more than 500 queries per IP address per day, then you'll need an API key. You can request a key at any time. Just go to the URL that I provided here in the green box, or click on the request a key buttons that you'll find on the developers page or the available APIs page. Once you have your key, make sure that you do use it with each and every query you make if you're going to go over that limit of 500 queries per day. It doesn't cost anything to use the key, and it's better to be safe than sorry, because if you do hit that limit of 500 queries per day and you don't have a key, the system will stop returning data for you until the next day. Although we won't be needing a key for the examples I'm going to be working through today, we'll only be running just a couple API queries for our examples. Using an API key with your queries is a good way to ensure you won't run into any kind of limitations when using the API. And it can also help, before we get over to our examples, to take a look at the different example queries or example URLs that you'll find for different data sets. So here we're looking at the examples found with the 2021 5-year ACS, or American Community Survey, data profiles dataset. So as you look through the examples, you'll see that while the overall structure is the same throughout all of them, meaning we have an endpoint that comes first, some variables or tables that come next, and then our geography comes last, you'll notice that some of the geographies are going to include asterisks, while others include just numbers. An asterisk, which is also referred to as a wildcard within the API, this asterisk or wildcard is going to indicate that all of that particular type of geography will be included. So for the example that I have highlighted here in the red box, we can see this &4 equals state : asterisk is going to return data on every single state. Now, rather than the asterisk, we also have numbers that are found on the geography portion. And these, for states at least, are going to indicate specific state FIPS codes or a unique identifier for a given geography. And again, to look at this example here, we can see this &4 equals state : 06 is going to indicate that data will be pulled just for California, which has a FIPS code of 06. For the examples coming up, we'll see that Puerto Rico has a state FIPS code of 72, and I'll show you how we found that out when we get over to our live demonstration. The last portion is where you would add your API key if you had one. For the examples we're going to be going through today, we'll actually be deleting this portion from our queries or have the API automatically delete it for us. But of course, if you did have a key you were using, you would just enter it where it says your key goes here. So now I wanted to take some time to walk through 3 different examples of using the API. So the first example, I wanted to start off simple and look just at finding the total population of all municipios in Puerto Rico, and I'm going to use the 2020 census for this. And when I think of finding data from the API, I like to kind of break down my question into 3 different parts. So we have a variable we're looking for in the API. This variable, we're looking for the total population. We have a geography, we're looking for all of the municipios in Puerto Rico. And then we have a data set we're using, and that's going to be the 2020 census in this case. And actually, when we're building out our API query, we're going to kind of work backwards through this. We're going to start with our data set, we're going to add in our geography, and then we're going to add in our variable. And then at that point, we'll have the answer to our question here. So I'm going to hop over to my browser here and get over to our developers page. So how do you get there? I'm starting here just on census.gov. And if you're anywhere on census.gov that has this data and maps dropdown, you should see a link to the developers page here. So I'm going to click directly on that developers link. Another helpful tip for getting here, if you don't want to bookmark this or anything like that, if you type census.gov/developers in your browser, it actually automatically redirects you back here as well. So on this page, as I mentioned earlier, we have links to developers forums, joining our mailing list, different guidance links. But where I'm going to be spending my time for these examples is this available APIs page on the left side of the screen here. So I'm going to click into this available APIs page and start drilling down to our data sets. So if I remember the question I was looking for, I said I wanted to start with my data set. So I was looking for data from the 2020 census. So we can see here, if we open at this plus sign next to decennial census, the first link here where it says decennial census 2020, 2010, 2000, that should take me to finding 2020 census data. So when I click into this page, we have a list of different available data sets from the decennial census. And right now we're looking at the most recent 2020 census data. You can, of course, go back to 2010 or 2000 if you like, but we'll stick with 2020 for now. And the more recent releases are up top here, such as our detailed demographic and housing characteristics file A, as well as our demographic and housing characteristics file, the DHC. And you could find population information from something like the DHC, but I think in case we have some newer users to the API here, I'm going to actually scroll down a bit more and go to one of our first releases from the API. That's going to be our redistricting data. I'm just choosing this one specifically because when we're going to look at the variables list, there's a lot less variables than something like the DHC. So looking through this for newer users is a bit easier to look through something like the variables list. So under the redistricting data here, we've got a couple different links, and I'm trying to get over to a variables list and those example URLs to help me start building this out. So what I'm going to click on is this last bullet point here that says 2020 PL examples and supported geography. So once I click on that, it's going to open up a new tab for me here, and I'm on the redistricting dataset page for the 2020 census here. So on this page, there's a couple different links we see, but there's really just two I want to focus on to help build out this query. I want to look at the examples list here to find how the syntax is built out for my geographies. And then I want to look at the variables list to find that total population variable I need. So what I'm going to do is actually work between two different tabs here. So first thing I'm going to do is right click on examples and open this examples list up in a new tab. The other thing I'm going to do, you could also open this one up in a new tab, but since this is the only other link I'm trying to get through from this specific dataset page is the variables list, I'll just click directly on this variables link here. So when I do that, I have my variables list open in one tab here, and in my other tab, I have my examples list to help me start building out my API query. And we mentioned we were looking for the total population of all municipios in Puerto Rico. And actually, municipios are going to be found under the county level geography here. So where it says state county at geography level 050, this is where we're going to find the municipio geography. And within this county geography here, we have three different links to choose from. And the only difference between each one of these links is the geography portion. So you can see the geography portion here is this ampersand 4 equals. In this case, I've highlighted the county. We could use this link, but it's going to be a bit tricky because this is just giving us the list of every county within the entire US. What I would like to do instead is get a list of all the counties or municipios rather in Puerto Rico here. So I am going to use the second link here because this is going to allow me to edit the state portion to just show data from Puerto Rico. So what I'm going to do is click directly on this second link here, and you'll notice when I do that, notice that the key portion at the end, when I click directly on the link and look up at my URL here, it actually automatically deletes that key portion since I'm not using one at this time. If you were to instead manually copy and paste that link up into your URL, into your address bar here, you would want to also manually delete that key portion. But for me, since I just opened it up here, it automatically deleted it for me. So we see here, we have a list of all of the counties in the United States, but I want just all the municipios in Puerto Rico. So first thing I need to do is find the state code for Puerto Rico because I want to tell the API right here, I want to change that asterisk to whatever the state code for Puerto Rico is. So to find it, what I can do is use the search function within my browser. And to do that, I'm going to just press Control and F, and it's going to open up this search box here. So again, I'm using Google Chrome in this case. If you're using a different browser, it may open up towards the bottom or something like that. If you're on a Mac, it may be Command F, but for me, I'm on Windows and using Google Chrome. So Control and F opens this search box. And what I'm going to search for is just type in Puerto Rico. And so when I do that, it brings me down to the section of this API page that's giving me geography information on Puerto Rico. So I can see the municipios here from Puerto Rico, but I don't want, let's say I don't want counties from Wyoming. I want to edit those out. So what I'm going to do is right here, take that state code of 72 from Puerto Rico and update the URL to reflect that. So I can highlight and copy the number 72 here and then go up to my URL. I'm just clicking up here. I'm going to hit backspace to remove that asterisk or wildcard as it's also called, and then paste in, or of course you can just type in the number 72. So now I have all counties, so I still have my all counties symbol here within just the state that has a state code of 72. So once I hit enter on this page and reload it, now I'm just getting data on all of the municipios in Puerto Rico. I also wanted to mention, you might notice some of the municipios have some broken characters here. It seems that we have a defect going on with some of the accent symbols over some of the characters. That is something we're looking into. So just wanted to point that out as something we're seeing at this time. But right now we do have our geography correct. We're pulling all the municipios in Puerto Rico, but we're not getting any data at this time. So we have to pull a variable and tell the API which variable we're looking for. So to do that, I'm going to go to my other tab that I opened earlier, that variables list. And as I scroll through this, it has the variable name and the variable label here. It's going to be alphabetized by name. So I'm going to start scrolling down until I see some variables that perhaps look a bit relevant to me. And as I scroll down, I start seeing these P1 variables here that are giving me some populations. So this P1 underscore 001N is actually going to give me a total population variable that I'm looking for. So what I'm going to be doing with this P1 underscore 001N variable is just similar to that state code of 72. I'll highlight it here, P1 underscore 001N, right click and copy it, or Control C. And then go back over to my other tab. So we're kind of going back and forth between these two tabs here. So back over to my other tab that I was looking for. I now need to just put in that variable that I had copied. And the place to put in that variable is within what we call the get equals portion here. So it can come anywhere after the equal sign in the URL and before the ampersand symbol where the geography starts. So in my case, I will just put it after the name variable here. And so to do that, we want to add a comma to separate our variables. So I'll have name, comma, and then paste in or just type in P1 underscore 001N. So once I do that and I hit enter to reload my page, now I've got some data returned, and I can see here, following our geography information, we have our data variable that was applied. We're looking at the total population for each one of these municipios as of the 2020 decennial census. So looking at something like Aguadilla Municipio, for example, we can see as of the 2020 census, it had a total population of 55,101. So that was what I wanted to cover for my very first example here, just looking at a single variable for a list of geographies. So coming back over to our slides here, moving on to my next example, some of you may have looked at that last one and thought, okay, this is useful, but I can just get populations of all municipios from something like data.census.gov. So what I wanted to do was show a common use case I've heard from data users in the past, where perhaps using an API query could be more efficient than going to another data source or something like data.census.gov to pull data from. So the example I'm looking at here is finding the male under 5 population for multiple races and ethnicities in Puerto Rico. And to do this, I'm using a series of tables from the 2021 American Community Survey 5-year estimates. So coming back over to my browser, before we started on the API here, and I'll close out of my old tabs here, I wanted to actually start on data.census.gov with a query I built out previously, a search I looked for. So I had built this out previously, and just in the interest of time, I already have it pulled up. If you all are interested in how I got here, if we have some time at the end, I can come back and go through it. Or I have instructions built into the slides that will be sent out to you all on how I did this, as well as all the API examples. But on this example here, I was looking at some race and ethnicity information broken down by sex and age within Puerto Rico. And when I did this, I was returned a series of tables back here. So we can see this B01001A table is showing sex by age for the white alone population, B01001B, sex by age for the Black or African American alone population. And there's 9 different tables in this series here, all the way down to B01001I for the Hispanic or Latino population. So if I was looking for something like the male under 5 population, as we can see here, for Hispanic or Latino in Puerto Rico, if I wanted to break it down within all of these 9 different races and ethnicities, I'd have to go table by table, either download these tables or jot these numbers down and have to memorize them. And it can be a bit time consuming and not as efficient to go through something like this. What we can do instead is build out one single API query to pull all 9 of these tables back at once in one single fell swoop. So to do this, I'm going to remember, first of all, I'm going to remember the table IDs I'm looking at. So I'm looking at, in this case, B01001A from the sex by age table for the white alone population. And I also want to take a look at the data set. So here I'm looking at the 2021 ACS 5-year estimates detailed tables data set. So that's going to help me remember where I need to go and start looking for this data within the API. So what I'm going to do now is go back over to the developers page and try to build out an API query about this. So I'm here, again, we're looking at decennial census. I'll just start back on the available APIs page. So again, just starting here on the available APIs page. And this time, as we saw when we were looking at data.census.gov, we saw we were looking first at the American Community Survey, specifically the 2021 5-year estimates. So I'm going to click on American Community Survey, and I'm going to look for those 5-year estimates. So here we go. We've got the American Community Survey 5-year estimates here. So I'm going to click directly on that. And then I'm going to scroll on down until I find the detailed tables, which was the other portion of that data set we were looking at. So as I scroll on down, there's some really helpful information on these ACS pages as well, talking about what these different table types are, comparing American Community Survey data, going back between years. But what I'm looking for are those detailed tables links. So as I scroll on down, here's the links that should get me to those detailed tables. And they look a little bit different than what we were seeing on the decennial census dataset page, but I'm still trying to get to the same place. I'm trying to get to the variables links, and I'm trying to get to the examples links. So this time, we see here the 2021 ACS detailed tables variables. I'm going to use the HTML link, which is going to get me into a same type of format we were just looking at. So once again, I'll right click on HTML and open that one up in a new tab so I have that ready to go for later. The other link, same as before, we're trying to get those examples lists. So this time, I'll right click on examples and open that up in a new tab. So again, the 2 links I opened up, the HTML variables and the examples links here. So coming first over to our example, so this is the variables links. I'm going to start actually with the examples list here. So we were just looking for data for Puerto Rico as a whole. So this time we'll use just the state geography. So we have the state geography here, geography level 040, and we have our 2 different links here. And we already figured out that FIPS code for Puerto Rico earlier, which was 72. So we know we just need to update this section of the URL with that 72. But if you had forgotten what the Puerto Rico FIPS code was, we could click on the first link here, which has that asterisk. And then when we go over to this page, we can see the FIPS code down at the bottom for Puerto Rico is going to be, of course, again, 72. So same thing like we did on the first example, go up into our address bar, remove that asterisk or wildcard as it's called, and replace it with the FIPS code for Puerto Rico, which is 72. And when I hit enter, now we have at least cleaned up the geography. So we've got the geography set. Now let's add in those variables that we were looking for. So to find those variables, I'm going to go to that variables page that I had opened up a moment ago. And from here, this is a list of all of the different variables from the detailed tables dataset. So what I need to do again is open that search box in my browser using Control and F. And once again, it opens up here towards the top of my screen in Google Chrome. And what I'm going to search for this time is the table ID I was looking for. So remember that first table ID we were looking at, B01001A, B01001B, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll start by searching for B01001A. And this takes me down to the different variables from that table here. And just as an example here, for my example, I was looking at the total male under 5 population. And again, for this first section, this is for the white alone population. And you can see here, that's going to be from this variable here, B01001A underscore 003E. So like I did on the first example, I will just highlight and copy this variable and take it over to the URL that I was building out. So I've got my male under 5 population variable for the white alone population copied. I'll take it over to my other tab where I'm building out this query, and I will start by removing the default variable that it gave me. So this is just a default variable that it gave me within that example URL. You can leave it if you would like. It's just giving me an estimated population of Puerto Rico as a whole. I'll just remove it from this specific example though. So I highlighted and deleted that, and then I will replace it with the variable that I copied, that B01001A underscore 003E. And remember, I still have my, sorry if it's a little bit difficult to see here, but I have that comma separating the two variables here. So each variable we add in, we're going to add a comma. Before we added in another variable, I actually wanted to remember to take a look back at data.census.gov that can hopefully help you visualize what these variables are representing here. So B01001A underscore 003E. So let's remember that and come back over to data.census.gov here just for a second. So B01001A is representing the table ID here. And then that underscore 003, if we actually physically count out 1, 2, 3 on this table, we can see that this is actually representing the third line of data in this table. And then the E in this case is just representing an estimate. So that's something to help you visualize what these variables are actually meaning here. You can think of them as kind of the lines within a table. The next thing we wanted to try and find though was perhaps from the Black or African American alone population, same thing, male under 5 population. So if we go back to our variables list and once again, open a search and look for B01001B, this will take us to that B01001B table for the Black or African American alone population. And we can see here the same thing for male under 5 population is going to be this variable here, B01001B underscore 003E. So I will copy this here, take it over to my URL, and same thing as before, I'll add a comma and then paste in that variable. And let's go ahead and do one more from this table. So coming back one more time to my variables list, let's look at B01001I, the Hispanic or Latino population. So here we can see the male under 5 population for Hispanic or Latino. Same thing for B01001I underscore 003E. So we'll take this variable, come back over, add a comma, and then paste in this variable. And yeah, so just in the interest of time, I'm just doing 3 variables here, but you could actually do up to 50 in this case. So you could do all 9 of those tables, for example, and pull all the different data variables back for each one of them. So once I hit enter and rerun this, now we can see the page updates, and there's no going back and forth between separate tables. We can see for each one of these, again, the male under 5 population, we have the white alone, Black or African American alone, and then Hispanic or Latino alone population for male under 5. So again, I just did 3 variables here, but looking back at the data.census.gov page, if we wanted to do male under 5 and female under 5 for all 9 of these tables, that would be 18 different variables that we could all put into one API query and pull them all at once rather than going back and forth between separate tables. So it's a good way to save some time if you have a use case such as this. So I'll take one last look over at our API query that we built out here. Again, we pulled in 3 variables here, but you could actually pull up to 50 if you would like. But that is going to cover it for my second example here. And the last example I wanted to go over was actually looking at how we could download an entire table. And to do this, before we get into that, I want to talk about the groups functionality that we're going to use to call all variables from a table. So to do this, instead of adding a single variable in like we've been doing, we'll be adding the word group into our URL, and then within parentheses, we'll add the table ID we're looking for. When you do this type of query, all variable names are going to appear followed by all of the values, and there may be several rows of variable names as well on top of that. And the values will follow also after all of the variables are given. Some of the advantages of using this group functionality is that it's going to allow you to pull more than 50 variables within a single call. And as we'll see in our next example, it will also allow us to download tables that perhaps would not be available in data.census.gov. So to do this, I wanted to download a social characteristics table, which is DP02PR for all places in Puerto Rico from the year 2005. I also wanted to mention that the places geography in Puerto Rico is going to include comunidades and zonas urbanas. Within the continental US, you would see things like cities from this places geography, but when we're looking at Puerto Rico, we will see those comunidades and zonas urbanas. So let's look at downloading this table from 2005, and perhaps also why would we even want to go and look and download this table from the API. So coming back over to my browser here, I had also pulled up earlier this DP02PR table, which is a social characteristics table in Puerto Rico. And we can see there's a lot of helpful information on here: household information, relationship information, marital status information. But when we're looking at the table through data.census.gov, if we go to the year dropdown, you'll notice that it only goes back to the year 2010. And that's a limitation of American Community Survey tables on data.census.gov, is that you can only go back to the year 2010. When we look on the API, however, we can go all the way back to 2005 for these American Community Survey tables. So I'm going to go back to the API and try to find that earlier American Community Survey data. So once again, I am going to go and start back on my available APIs page. And once again, we were using the American Community Survey. So I'll open the dropdown here. And this time I am going to use the 1-year data in this case. There is a limitation with the 1-year data that it's only available with areas of populations of 65,000 or more. So it's going to be restricted to larger geographies. If you wanted all geographies covered, you would want to make sure to use the 5-year estimates. But you'll notice here, 5-year data only goes back to 2009. I just wanted to focus on the 1-year data to show you could go back all the way to 2005 if needed. So let me click on this ACS 1-year data here and start drilling down to our data set. So on the page here, we're going to scroll down until we get about halfway through and we see these years. So if we click on the More dropdown here, we're able to go all the way back to the year 2005. So that's what I'm going to do here, is click this dropdown and go back to the year 2005 and start building out my API query. So from 2005, there were actually only these 2 data sets available. The one we were looking at, that DP02PR table, is a data profile table. So what I'm going to do, similar as we've done before, is open our examples and our variables in new tabs. So once again, I will open the examples and supported geography here, and then I will open the HTML link for variables here. So we'll start on this examples page here, and actually this one does take me directly to the dataset page, so I'll have to click one more time like we did on our decennial census example into the examples link here to help us start building out our query. So on this page, I mentioned we were looking for all comunidades and zonas urbanas, which are going to be found under the place geography here. And that's going to be coming from this geography level 160. So similar to how when we were looking at the county geography for municipios, there's 3 different links we can choose from here. I'm going to choose the second one because it's going to allow me to edit the state code to add in that Puerto Rico FIPS code in there. So if I click directly on this link here, like we've been doing before, again, it deletes that key portion for me automatically. And right now it's pulling a single variable from all places in all states. So I want to update the URL here. So first thing, like we've done a couple times already, we'll change the asterisk following state colon to 72. That's state code for Puerto Rico. And then this time, we're going to use the group functionality to pull all variables from that DP02PR table. So what I'm going to do is actually completely delete name and this other variable it's given me. So I'll just highlight and delete these. So right after get equals, I'll add in group and then open my parentheses. DP02PR is the table I'm looking for, and close my parentheses. So I still have this within the get equals portion here. So right after the equal sign, I added that in, and I'm right before the ampersand symbol. So now when I hit enter on this page and reload it, we're able to pull all the variables from DP02PR. And of course, when looking at it within the browser here, it's quite difficult to look at and parse through. So what we're going to do is, rather than trying to find the data within the browser here, is actually save it to Excel. So to do this, all we have to do is right click anywhere on the page and then choose Save As. So when I right click and choose Save As, it's going to open my file browser here. I can name the file name whatever I want. I'll name it DP02PR, but I do have to make sure I add a .csv at the end. That's the important part. Anything before the .csv can be any name you'd like, but do make sure you have a .csv at the end. The other important thing to remember is to change your save as type to all files. So once we do that, make those two changes and go ahead and hit save. The file should download for me, and I'll go ahead and open it up. And once we open it up here, you can see now it is looking a bit better. We have it nice and neatly organized, these variables within the column. So it's a bit easier to look at here. There's one more change I like to make though. You'll notice that we just see geo IDs here rather than geography names. And on this older ACS table, it actually comes toward the middle of the API output here. So I like to change that around. To do that, I'm going to search, again, just using Control and F, like I did within my browser to open the search button here. And if I search for Puerto Rico and then click Find Next, it will take me over, and you'll notice here, here's where those name variables are, those different geography names for our zona urbanas here in this case. So what I'll do is right click and cut these variables and then scroll back to column A, and I just like to insert them into here into column A. So now we have our different places within Puerto Rico here, and we have our variables here. At this point, there is a bit of back and forth you have to do between the browser and Excel, so we have to try and find the different variables we're looking for. So if I go back over to my browser here and go to the variables list, and if I do, again, a quick search using Control and F and search for DP02PR, that table we're looking for, you can see here we have those different variables from DP02PR, the table that we pulled. So the first variable on the list, the one that ends in 1E here, is going to be the population for 3 years and over enrolled in school. So if I go back to my Excel file here, I'll see here, again, the first variable we see on the list, DP02PR underscore 0001E. This would be for the population 3 years and over enrolled in school for each one of these different zona urbanas here. And obviously, on a larger table like this, it can be a bit taxing to do that back and forth between the browser. So what you can do instead is a workaround in Excel is use this VLOOKUP function to pull in those variable labels automatically. And I'm not going to walk through the steps to do on this one within the webinar today, but within the PowerPoint that's going to be sent out to you all following the completion, I have the steps for each one of these to add these in. So I have a really helpful video that's going to walk you through how I did this. And now you can see for this table here, there's no going back and forth between the browser. We have the variable labels pulled in and matched up under each one of these. So the thing we were looking at earlier, this variable here, now we don't have to go back to the browser and see that, okay, this is for population 3 years over enrolled in school. We can just look within the Excel file here, and it's a lot simpler. So again, I'm not going to walk through the steps for this VLOOKUP function in the webinar today, but I have a really helpful video included in the PowerPoint that's going to be sent out to you all. So on this one, I just wanted to close out by saying I hope this one was helpful for you all, especially when you're looking at these older ACS tables that perhaps are not available on data.census.gov. This is one way you can access them, pull them in, and perhaps have them a bit more readable than looking through the API. Saving them to Excel can be really, really helpful. And of course, you can save things to Excel for any table you're looking at. It doesn't have to be just a grouped call like we were doing for the example we were looking at previously, where we were looking at the different races and ethnicities for male under 5 population. You could do the same thing for that table and save that as well. But that is going to be it for the 3 exercises that I had for you all. Again, I have step-by-step instructions included in the PowerPoint that you all can go through later if you wanted to walk through these again on your own. And we'll also have a recording later on for this webinar. So the last thing I wanted to do before we closed out with some questions was just walk through some final resources to help you learn more about using the API. The first links I had here were for not just our data.census.gov resources page, but also our API resources page. So both of these have really helpful links within them, different how-to walkthroughs, upcoming releases, webinars, as well as video tutorials that can help you stay connected and then learn more about using the API. So lots of helpful information on these resources pages. If you would like to receive email updates, you can do so at the link provided here. You just have to enter your email into the email box and check the boxes that you're interested in receiving updates on, such as data.census.gov or the Census Data API. And I also wanted to mention our workshops that we have available. So we have 5 different workshops available. 3 of these are going to be focused on data.census.gov, 1 on the microdata access tool, and 1 on the API. And these are really our most comprehensive learning tools we have for our 3 products here. And what the webinar was today was basically a trimmed down version of the API workshop, because these workshops are more 2 to 3 hours long, so they go much more in depth. So if you were interested in learning more, perhaps getting a bit more practice either on data.census.gov or the API, I'd recommend registering for one of those workshops. We have a couple coming up in November and December. But that was all I had for you all. So I wanted to say thank you all so much for taking some time to learn a bit more about the API. And I think I saw a couple questions coming through in the chat. So I wanted to turn things over to Noemi and see if she could help me read through some of those questions if we had any that were unanswered.
Yeah, I just would like clarification, Sam. We got a question whether or not when you use the API, can you also pull the margin of error?
Yes, you can. So if we actually look back at this example that I was looking at earlier, typically the E is looking at, when we're looking at ACS variables, this 0001E is looking at the estimate here, where the 0001M is actually looking at the margin of error. So that M is actually representing margin of error here. So when we're looking at those ACS estimates, yes, you absolutely can pull up both the estimates as well as the margins of error.
The question about offer a similar API with the geospatial component to use with Esri products.
Noemi, I think you cut out a bit there for me. Could you repeat that question back one more time?
Hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so we got a question and I'm looking up the answer too as we speak, but if you knew offhand, do you offer a similar API with the geospatial component built in to use with Esri products?
I am not entirely sure. I know if you were just looking for something like the Geo ID, you could pull that from the data API like we did. If it's something other than that, I'm not sure I knew the answer to that. What you could do, Noemi, if you're not able to find it, um, whoever had that question, you can email us at the email that I have up on the slides right now, and then we can forward that question over to our geography team and they'll be able to help us out with that. But if you were just
Yeah,
if you were
I
just
don't
looking
believe we
for
do. Mhm,
okay, yeah, if they were just looking for the geo ID though, you
mhm.
definitely can pull that from the API. You just add in a variable that says, I believe it's geo underscore ID or geo ID. You'll see it in the variables list.
Yeah, I believe you have to go to our tiger under the geography page and look for tiger files, and then you can pull the tiger files, which are the shape files from there. And like Sam was saying, you can connect that with the geo ID for your any GIS product.
Okay, yes. And yeah, if whoever had that question needs more clarification or anything, go ahead and send us an email. We can take a closer look or check with our geography team if needed.
That's all that we have.
Okay, well, thank you all so much. And I know this was a lot of information packed into one webinar. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I have the step-by-step instructions included that will come with the release of the PowerPoint here. And if you wanted to learn more, I encourage you all to join us with that API workshop, which is more in depth as well. But just wanted to say thank you all again. Thank you to Noemi and Anthony for helping out with the webinar as well. And I will turn things over to you, Anthony, to close us out.
Oh, thank you, Sam. Well, that concludes today's session. You may disconnect at this time. Have a great day, everyone.